السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. لعل دولة جنوب أفريقيا تعد مرساة للمنطقة المحيطة بها، بيد أن استقرار هذه البلاد وقوتها اليوم بات أكثر هشاشة وفي مرمى الهيجان العنصري وحتى الحرب الأهلية، ما قد يضر بتأثير جنوب أفريقيا على كل القارة السمراء. الاضطرابات والفوضى في جنوب أفريقيا مع المحامي الدولي لحقوق الإنسان زياد باتيل من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعوا. بعد 27 عاما من السجن تم الإفراج عن نيلسون مانديلا عام 1990، وأطلق مفاوضات لإنهاء الفصل العنصري في جنوب أفريقيا ليحقق السلام في دولة منقسمة عرقيا وليقود الكفاح من أجل حقوق الإنسان في جميع أنحاء العالم. أما اليوم فيبدو أن زمن الفصل العنصري في جنوب أفريقيا لم ينتهي تماما، حيث إن الإعلان عن القضاء على الأبارتايد عنى للكثيرين بداية عهد قائم على المساواة الاجتماعية والاقتصادية في البلاد، حيث يصبح العاملون في المزارع من المالكين، ويتمكن الفقراء من ذوي البشرة السمراء من الانتقال من البلدات والمستوطنات التي كانت محفوظة ذات يوم لغير البيض إلى الأحياء التي يعيش فيها المواطنون البيض الذين ينحدرون من أصول هولندية بحسب المراقبين. هذا التغيير حدث في بعض المناطق، فنتجت عنه طبقة وسطى من ذوي البشرة السمراء وأخرى من النخبة الثرية، وأقرت الحكومة أن على الشركات الخاصة توظيف جزء معين من ذوي البشرة السمراء، لكن الواقع الآن مغاير لما جرى إقراره آنذاك، إذ يكسب البيض الذين يشكلون 9% من سكان جنوب أفريقيا 6 أضعاف ما يجنيه ذوو البشرة السمراء كمعدل متوسط، ويسيطر البيض على الصناعات الأكثر إنتاجية وربحا كالمناجم والمصارف والزراعة. هذا الأمر فجر التوترات العنصرية في البلاد مؤخرا، ولعل لجنة جنوب أفريقيا لحقوق الإنسان سجلت منذ مطلع العام الحالي أكثر من 160 شكوى لها علاقة بممارسات عنصرية في يناير كانون الثاني، وهو الرقم الشهري الأكبر خلال السنوات ال20 الماضية وفقا لما ذكره المسؤولون. زياد باتيل المحامي الدولي لحقوق الإنسان من جنوب أفريقيا يتطرق من الداخل إلى عوامل متعددة تؤدي إلى اضطرابات هائلة في البلاد، فهل بتنا على شفا نوع من الحرب الأهلية وأمام احتمالية اندلاع نوع من الثورة الثانية هناك؟ ومن جانب ثان من يحاسب إسرائيل اليوم على جرائمها وتجاوزاتها المتكررة لحقوق الإنسان. Ziad Patel, international human rights lawyer from South Africa. Welcome to من الداخل from the inside, sir.
Thank you, and thank you so much for having me on your show.
We are happy to have you, sir. Before we delve into talking about your solidarity work in the sense with the Palestinians and the Palestinian cause, I would like you to shed some light and highlight what is going on today in South Africa. South Africa, which has been an economic and democratic leader of the sub-Saharan Africa since emerging from the apartheid rule, which also resembles Israeli apartheid, two sides of the same coin, back in 1994. Today, despite the fact that South Africa has huge potential, it's going on through massive turmoil, and turmoil which is of many factors and facets: economic, xenophobic, political, racist, everything. What is going on, Ziad?
Yes, South Africa is very questionable at this stage. I think to bring your viewers more insight into the political situation, we need to go back to probably 2008, 2009, when what we call the notorious Polokwane Conference, when we had a changeover within the African National Congress. And the new leadership had taken over in the incumbent President Jacob Zuma. I think political turmoil started from that time when we had President Thabo Mbeki, who was the previous president and who was looking for a third term in the ANC and was not allowed to continue the chairmanship or the presidency of the ANC. And what had subsequently happened from that was, the recall of President Thabo Mbeki. So we actually did not have, the succession policy that, the previous president had intended for South Africa. Yes, the ANC continues to still be a democratic
which is the ruling
structure.
party.
The ruling party, yes, the ruling party. It still continues to be a democratic structure within itself. But yes, it's also a party, as we could call it, at war with itself. Because we've got two different factions within the ANC wanting to take the party into two different directions. I think one of the most important concerns of many South Africans with regard to the present president, Jacob Zuma, is his historical record. He's been implicated in so many different cases. There was the most recently the corruption charges with regard to the Nkandla scandal. Prior to that, he was involved just, I think, before his presidency with the rape scandal. South Africa having, a high incidence of HIV and him having unprotected, relations was also a cause for major concern, because South Africa in sub-Saharan is a high incidence of HIV. We've had that, we've had corruption charges, and we've also had the president making taking certain stances. More recently, for instance, in an area of work that I'm involved in terms of international criminal law and international law, when we had the Sudanese President al-Bashir,
Omar al-Bashir
come to South Africa, on the premise of an AU visit, African Union visit of many delegates, knowing full well that President Omar al-Bashir had been indicted in the International Criminal Court for war crimes and crimes against humanity, was still permitted and allowed to come into South Africa for this meeting. That again on its own was a debacle, because what had happened there was there was a directive from a high court in Pretoria which stated that South Africa must not, or South African authorities should not permit Omar al-Bashir to leave South African territory, and that he should be extradited to the International Criminal Court to face war crimes charges. Very much similar to the work I'm doing with regard to Israeli commanders and crimes committed against Palestinians. Despite a high court order from the Gauteng Division Pretoria, in the Pretoria High Court, President Zuma on that instance defied a high court order and had allowed Omar al-Bashir to leave South African territory. So that was one example of the president, usurping, but rather also violating the constitution of the Republic of South Africa.
And also one of the major issues is the financial or the economic issue and the sacking of the financial minister.
Yes, of course.
In South Africa, which led also to a certain kind of disobedience and an outcry.
Yes, most certainly. And I will come to the sacking recently of Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. But just to show or explain to your viewers that we've been having a challenge in terms of the office of the Republic, presidency of the Republic of South Africa, in terms of how he applies himself when it comes to the application of the rule of law. So the case of Omar al-Bashir was one example of where he violated the rule of law and did not allow the separation of powers and abide by a court order. Apart from that, also one of the very big scandals was called the Nkandla scandal, where certain state funds from the Department of Public Works was utilized in the development of the Nkandla household, which is the private household of the president. This became a major corruption scandal. It led to an investigation with the Office of the Public Defender. Opposition political parties had taken this on because there was a huge amount of money that was spent, and this was taxpayers' money. This eventually went to the highest court in the land, which is the Constitutional Court, and the Constitutional Court had ordered that the president pay a certain amount of those expenses back, but it also gave a very damning judgment against the president. And I think, understanding that South Africa post-1994 became a constitutional democracy, a constitutional state, and one of the very important principles and values that a president of the republic needs to uphold is the constitution. And in this instance, again, President Zuma had violated the constitution. So I think this has been the build-up, and what we've then recently have had is also what we call state capture, where, for instance, certain very renowned Indian families in South Africa, more importantly the Gupta family, was implicated for the first instance of an appointment of a finance minister who only remained a minister for a few days due to the public outcry. And that then developed into what we call state capture, whereby private individuals and private enterprises were determining the cabinet of the Republic of South Africa. So once Finance Minister Gordon had been appointed as finance minister, we started seeing that markets started settling, the economic situation started stabilizing again. The rand was also trading at a stable level. And of course, I mean, all countries want FDI, which is foreign direct investment. So, foreign direct investment is very related to basically credit ratings, international credit ratings by Standard & Poor, Flinch, and other credit agencies.
Mr. Patel, allow me here to ask you something. The continued economic inequality that we talked about has contributed to a wave of sort of racial tension. The South African Human Rights Commission received 160 racism-related complaints in January, the highest monthly figure in its 20-year history, according to officials. So are we on the brink of a kind of civil war inside South Africa?
I think it's concerning that reports and complaints have been lodged with the Human Rights Commission. Xenophobic attacks have existed, and xenophobic attacks, has different patterns. It goes on a high and it goes low again, so it varies. I think xenophobia is also related to socio-economic conditions. But no, I do not think that South Africa is at any stage or brink of any civil war. I think
racist.
No.
Incidents and conflict.
There are racist. There are xenophobic incidents of xenophobic attacks. But also we must, inform the viewers that it also does get managed. Civil society does get involved, and where it originates from. There's organizations and leaders that go to these communities, and basically advocate for not doing this type of conduct and steering away from xenophobia. Of course, xenophobia is unconstitutional. It's a violation of human rights, and it does not accord with South Africa's constitutional values. Also, I mean, South Africa does implement a principle of assimilation. So whereby, refugees that come from all parts of the world and from Southern Africa into South Africa
are assimilated
into South African society, and need to comply with South African laws in terms of getting the necessary papers and work permits. But yes, human rights is something that is accorded not only to South Africans but to all who come to South African shores. So yes, that's one of the reasons, Zeynep, why we have the Human Rights Commission, like the Public Defender. These are actually Chapter 9 institutions of the Constitution to ensure that there's always protection and to ensure that there's always oversight and that there's always abidance with constitutional values.
Yes, Mr. Ziad Patel, allow us to stop now for a short break, and then after the break, I need to ask you a question which is just, related to South Africa. Are we also put differently to face a kind of South African revolution, just, you know, similar to what was going on in the Arab Spring, so-called Arab Spring, which has turned into a winter actually in the Arab world, but after the break. إذا فاصل قصير ونعود، لا تذهبوا بعيدا. يشير المراقبون إلى ظهور فجر جديد في جنوب أفريقيا، ويعبرون عن آمالهم في أنها قد تكون بداية لثورة جنوب أفريقية جديدة. ويصرح مراقب أن احتمال انتشار الفوضى في موطن نيلسون مانديلا كبير، لكنه يعد فرصة لإعادة نهضة الدولة، وبعبارة أخرى هي ثورة ثانية، وقد تكون بعظمة الثورة التي أدت إلى إنهاء الفصل العنصري وإحلال الديمقراطية. قلة يشككون اليوم بأن عملية الانتقال قد تخللها الكثير من العيوب، فالمساومات التي أجريت عام 1994 دفعت الكثيرين إلى القول إن مانديلا والمؤتمر الوطني الأفريقي باعوا النضال والتحرر الحقيقي، واعتمدوا اتفاقية عقدها البنك الدولي وصندوق النقد الدولي ولم تكن في مصلحة الشعب. زياد باتيل المحامي الدولي لحقوق الإنسان من جنوب أفريقيا، ما رأيه في هذه التصريحات؟
Yes, I don't agree with what's the statement. I think that the leadership of Nelson Mandela had done everything in their powers at the time in terms of bringing a negotiated settlement to South Africa. I think just to bring your viewers in, you know, what we should understand is that South Africa at the time of 1994 could have been on the brink of civil war. It was a very tumultuous period with also a lot of third force activities that was going on in the townships more especially. You know, we had massacres just prior to the elections. You know, there was also the very ultra right-wing Afrikaner groups, the Boerebond and so forth, that had their own nefarious agenda of you know, bringing the state to turmoil. Within that, you also had third force activities, and you also had a lot of you know, you had a lot of tension between the different various tribal factions as well as between Zulus and other you know, tribal factions in South Africa. So it was an extremely very difficult you know, situation, and this I'm actually speaking about from memory as growing up during that period. Mandela and you know, the quality of leadership that he showed to diffuse a situation that was had a lot of tension and could have erupted into civil war was nothing less than a miracle. You know, and bringing all different racial groups together around the table and then having a negotiated settlement was in the best interest of all South Africans. And I think, you know, that is the South African miracle, is because although we had tension, we had, you know, eruptions of faction fightings and xenophobia and whatever it may have been at the time, we did have overall a peaceful and negotiated settlement where the first general elections went off very peacefully and was actually you know, a symbol of victory for the oppressed people of South Africa that endured you know, so many years of apartheid, but so many 100 years of colonialism as well. You know, where all people had received the one man, one vote, or the equality of vote. And I think
that's
that was
democracy.
And that was the democracy that Mandela fought for. You know, he fought for a country that said that I'll struggle for a country that will have democracy, that will live with democracy, and that no person would be higher than the other. So there's no racial classification of one higher than the other. So I fought against white domination, I'll fight against black domination. And that's an ideal for which I believe which I will struggle for, but it's not an ideal.
Ziad, here, whatever South Africa has passed through in terms of apartheid, the Palestinians have been passing through too. And the apartheid in South Africa and the apartheid in Palestine are two sides of the same injustices being practiced against the human beings in both areas. What does the international law say in this sense?
Zainab, and this again comes to the question about who will hold Israel accountable for its gross violations of human rights. You know, I was invited last year to the 31st session of the United Nations Human Rights Council, and I was mandated to speak about Palestinian prisoners and Palestinian prisoners' rights. And one of the aspects that I focused on was the similarity between, you know, apartheid South Africa and apartheid Israel. For instance, in South Africa, we had the 19-day detention law, where you could be detained for 90 days without trial, without legal representation, and all forms of torture and all forms of inhumane conduct was committed. And that was very similar to, you know, what's going on in the occupied Palestinian territories, and more especially with Palestinian prisoners who are being tortured. And that is a crime against humanity. I also brought the case study of Ahmed al-Manasra at the time, who was a young teenager, and you know, he was injured, and after being injured, he was forced to taken to an Israeli, you know, police station, where he was interrogated with his injuries and screamed at without any form of legal representation. And I believe that Ahmed al-Manasra was with his cousin who had died at that incident. So, you know, I covered areas of home confinement or home imprisonment, also Palestinian prisoners, child prisoners, the rights of Palestinian child prisoners. But how would those laws be enforced? Like the many resolutions, and like the resolutions at the Human Rights Council last year, which reaffirmed Palestinian prisoners' rights, to say that Israel needs to abide with international law. So I would advise, and I would, you know, compel the international community, wherever they may be. So, you know, all active citizens, all advocates for a Palestinian liberation, all good, conscionable human beings that believe and know that the oppression in Palestine cannot continue as the way it is. You know, to force their governments to play their hand, and the government to, you know, to take a stance that would be in accord with international law and international humanitarian law. But Zainab, I would say that also I am aware that there is a lack of traction when it comes to international organizations and bodies, like the United Nations, like the International Criminal Court.
Exactly.
It's one and the same.
And allow me to stop you here, Ziad. We have lots of other questions. Maybe sometime when we come to visit South Africa, we'll just, you know, detail more on certain issues related to South Africa, related also to Palestine, this correlation between the two nations and their suffering. Ziad Patel, international human rights lawyer from South Africa, many thanks indeed for joining us.
Thank you so much.
Always welcome, sir. إذا لقاء جديد في الأسبوع المقبل مع ضيف جديد وقضية جديدة ودائما من الداخل. المزيد من التواصل بريدنا @الميادين.net وصفحتنا على الفيسبوك من الداخل. من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.